Hello, everybody, and welcome to Gen Friends. I'm so happy that you're able to join us. And joining me on the panel tonight is the archive lady. Melissa Barker herself is here to talk to me tonight. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Cheri. How are you doing there?
I am good. I am good. Well, I'm excited that you were able to join me tonight. We are going to talk about the fourth episode, season 5's fourth episode of Finding Your Roots. This episode was all about immigrants. All three of the people on the show were immigrants. Some, farther back than others. Some were recent, and they did Marisa Tomei, they did Sheryl Sandberg, and they also did Kal Penn. So I figure they started with Marisa, really, so we'll just start with Marisa.
What I thought this is an episode that I actually knew all three of the people.
I know. I guess I did know them. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so they were familiar to me. A lot of these celebrities that they're doing on Who Do You Think You Are and Finding Your Roots, I'm kind of like, and who are they?
And who are they? But they all have interesting stories. So by the end, you don't care that you didn't know who they were to begin with.
Yeah.
So, yeah. What I thought was really funny about Marisa was she said that when she grew up, she didn't grow up feeling like I'm Italian, because she said she had friends from everywhere. She'd go to her Greek friend's house, and celebrate with them, whatever Greek food they were eating. She would do the same with her Jewish friends. And so she really didn't identify herself as Jewish until she started getting Italian, until she started getting those roles, the Italian girl, So
that's right.
That's when she really started to identify herself as Italian. So with her, they started with her maternal grandmother, who was and I'll butcher this because I don't speak Italian. Mm-hmm. Dignotti is what they said her last name was. Her name was Maria Dignotti. And she was from Sicily. And I thought it was great that they went back to Sicily and they were able to find her father's, this grandmother of her, they were able to find her father's birth certificate in Sicily. Wow, who would have thought that they'd be able to go to Sicily and find something from the 1800s, a birth certificate? So I thought that was really amazing. But what I really liked even more, Melissa, is that he said, this document shows us two things. One, the location where they were at a given point in time. And I went, yes, that's exactly that. And then it gave his parents' names. So I thought that was good that he was saying, when you get these documents, look for what they're telling you.
Absolutely. I teach all the time, and I'm sure that you do too, that when we get our hands on these documents, these original documents, that we just squeeze them for every little piece of information that we can find on them. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes I've actually gone back and looked at documents that I thought I had combed through pretty clearly, and I found something else that I had just overlooked or missed. And so that was a great message for all genealogists, is to really look at those documents.
Right. And I think a lot of that comes from, too, when we first get started, we find that birth record, we just want the birth information. We find the death record, we just want the death information. And it comes with learning and time and practice and building your skills that you realize, I needed everything that document said. I need to take all the clues that document had in it. And so I try to let people know from the beginning, write everything down. Even if there's not a place for that information in your little charts where you're filling them out, keep notes and write down everything, because those things are going to lead you to other places and other documents and other records that can help you. So, and then cite it, of course, so you don't have to go back and find it again.
Absolutely.
Or go back and look at it and go, I had the answers all the time. They were right here.
Yes, that's happened to me. That has happened to me.
It's happened to all of us. I think I've told y'all before that I found a child that I'd missed once in a census record. Completely just, when I was transcribing it, completely just skipped it. So that was frustrating, and I was not happy with myself. But we all do it. We all do it. And you know what? Even no matter how long we've been researching, we have to really watch ourselves, because we can make those silly mistakes no matter how many years we've been researching. So they found this next generation back, and this man was a carpenter, and this was still that Dignati family. And he was saying that at that time period in the 1800s, that Sicily was one of the poorest areas, the poorest countries in Europe. And so that's why so many people were trying to flee and get out of there. So as they kept going back in his family, they found a very interesting piece of information, Melissa, about that Dignati family. And if you wanted to talk about that, about what the name
they
meant.
found that the name Dignati meant not known. And so
it's not known.
We are, as genealogists, we're always, I think that we're always thinking about the origins of the names that we research and how they may have changed over time, if they changed. I know that my maiden name, Lee Master, has changed. Not necessarily the pronunciation as the spelling. And I've gone back to the 1600s with that name, and the name was different. And even today, there's different variations of it. But to find out what your immigrant ancestor's name means, there's a meaning to it,
right?
And to find out that it is not known, it's interesting, And so I like that they shared that, and that I hope that helps genealogists to, like we've been talking about, digging deeper. Not just taking the name for the name, but looking into it. What does it mean in the original language and things like that.
And that it means a whole different, it just opens up new avenues of thought. Is he the one that they didn't know who the birth father was, or was it the generation back and that name was passed? How many generations back did that occur where there was an unknown, father, and that name was given and then just passed down through the generations as if it was a last name? Very interesting. Very, very interesting. And I wonder how many of us, especially when it's a foreign language and we don't understand that language, have that in our own, family trees, and we just don't even know that that's what this means.
And that's it was a good point also to make. When you have done enough research or gone back as far as you have to where you reach those records that are in a different language, don't be intimidated by those, and really, really try hard to find someone or use Google Translate or something to translate those records. Don't let them sit. Because there can be something contained in them that will help you with your research. And if you're just intimidated or just like, well, I don't know the language, my son-in-law, I'm actually working on his ancestry, and I have some records that are in Portuguese that I got from his family. And so I'm like, oh, okay, but just leaving them and just thinking, well, they're just in another language, I'll put them aside. If there may be information, those words on that page, once they're translated, may really open up some doors for you.
There is, for people that don't know, there's a Facebook group that is a genealogy translations Facebook group, and you can upload whatever it is you need translated, a document, whatever it might be, words that you found somewhere, and people will translate those for you. So that's a really good source too. If you can't figure out what something says, just upload it and say, please, is anybody on this group, can they translate this for me? So I've used it before, and there's some very kind people on there.
They are.
They're there to help. So her immigrant ancestor came over, they said, with $10 in his pocket. He had $10 when he got to the United States. And what was the year? Seeing if I wrote down what the year was. I know it was in the late 1800s. And he was able to get a job, and then slowly his wife and his 6 children were able to come over. So he was able to bring everybody over, and then that started, that line in her family. And she knew of that name, but she had not seen it with the apostrophe, the D and the apostrophe. So she said when she saw it, she thought, okay, that's different. That's different from the way that I know that name. So, and that's why, because it was actually an Italian word. So, and then her paternal grandfather, they came from, a poor area of Italy as well. I mean, both sides of her family just came from really poor. You know what? I forgot to mention that I want to mention really quick before we go into that paternal side. And that was the fact they showed that photo of the foundling wheel, they called it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and those were in churches. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and actually, especially with Catholic churches, it was extremely popular. I would say popular, but if it was used, it was in the Catholic, especially in the Catholic Church, they had these for those people who could not take care of their children. They were just so poor that they couldn't, or something had happened that they just couldn't. So it was an extremely wonderful way to pass those children along to the nunnery, or maybe they had orphanages or places that they placed children, but it was pretty prevalent, and it saved a lot of children's lives.
They said 70% in that area in the 1800s, 70% of children were put in there.
Yeah.
That's telling you how poor these people were.
Yes, they were.
They were, scraping up every bit of piece of money they could find, to get over to America, to start that new life. And so the same thing happened on her paternal side. But before they decided to come to America, research showed that she had a third great grandfather who worked with King Ferdinand. He actually had a government position in this government. You want to take it away? You can if you want.
Well, I was telling you before we started, I watched this on Wednesday, so it's kind of stuck since then. But I remember them saying that she was really excited that he had that government job.
Yeah.
And it's like us. I think a lot of my ancestors were just poor dirt farmers, and so when you can find any piece of information that they were associated with anything or had any type of standing, it makes you kind of stand up and pay attention. And so I think that she enjoyed the fact that he had that standing, and that and with such a well-known person.
Exactly. Well, during the time of the rebellion in Spain, when the people wanted to get rid of the king and have a people's government, her third great grandfather made a document. It was a court document, and he was providing testimony during this rebellion time. And the testimony was that he saw this guy who was on trial take a bust of King Ferdinand, take it away, and shoot it. So, I thought that was a pretty funny story. But her third great grandfather, what he was doing was he was the one that witnessed it, and so he was testifying, and she was a little sad because she wanted him to be on the side of the people. But it's just like every other episode that we see. Our ancestors are our ancestors, and they're going to do what they think is right for them and their family. I'm sure he wanted to keep that position. He had a family to feed. So it probably would not be good for him to be joining, the people's rebellion against the king, until probably the time came where it looked like, okay, they're going to win. Okay, it'll be all right. I mean, I don't know if that's when he, decided to change his mind, but she was not happy that he was, he was the one testifying against this guy.
It's true. And one of the things I really like about these shows is that when they bring in the history of the time, even if their ancestors were involved in it themselves or not, it really places our ancestors in a time and place. I encourage genealogists all the time, as you're doing your genealogy research and you're digging up the dates and the times, kind of broaden, kind of look up from that and broaden and look around just a little bit as to what was going on at the time your ancestors lived and where they lived, even down to the local history. Yeah. And because, in a lot of ways and a lot of times I have found that I get some answers doing that, because I find out, well, why did he move here? Or why did they do this? A lot of times it's because of the outside sources of history that's happening around them that they did what they did.
Exactly. And for all of these three immigrants, there's a theme. There's a real theme of needing to get out to be able to support their families and move on in the lives that they want, they were confined where they were. So,
Absolutely.
they know why, just because of this history, they know why they left. And so it's really, really important that we look at that history and see what's going on, because it affected everything they did. They didn't live in a bubble, whatever was happening in the world and, like you said, in their communities was affecting them. So an interesting thing is they were able to find a document later that showed a list of people who were then supporting the unification, the rebellion, and her ancestor's name was on that list. So that made her feel a little bit better that, yay, he went over to the right side, as she felt that it was. And she said something that I thought that was really interesting. And she said, they'll never be lost again. We're talking about these people that she didn't know anything about. And she said, they'll never be lost again, because now she's got her big book, that they made and all that.
Yep.
So she's
and her tree.
And her everything. Yeah. So she's got that. So they won't be lost again. She can pass that down. They did her DNA, and they talked about her admixture. And, most of that was Italian, of course, as you would think. And then they said, but you actually match somebody who's been on the series before. And of course he says, no, turn the page.
She loved me. He says, turn the page. Julianne Moore. And then you found out, she said that they were, did they go to college together or something?
Together. Yeah, that's something. They went to school together.
Yeah.
And they didn't match in the Italian side. They matched somewhere else deep in their DNA, which people need to understand can happen,
Yeah, no, and then that was like towards the end of the show, and then you're like, okay, what? I want to know what happened.
Yeah.
What's the rest of the story,
Where's some notes on the show? What other DNA, how did they match? But I thought that was really cool, that it was somebody that she knew, other than being another famous actress. She knew her. She literally knew her. So I thought that was really cute that they were able to do that. And I guess that's what they do, as they are doing the DNA, they see if anybody matches. And we've seen a couple of episodes where they put people together that have matched. And that
I thought last season that they did that a couple of times, and it was a couple of really surprising ones too.
Yeah.
And who matched too. But I thought that was neat. But it was at the end, and you were just like, oh, I want to know more about, because it wasn't the Italian side. It was a different. Okay, well, what
Where was it and how? And let us know. Yeah, they need to do some recap shows on these and let us know the rest of the story. The next person was Sheryl Sandberg, who is the COO of Facebook, and she had some very interesting stories. Both sides of her family are Jewish, and that's something that she's always known and grew up with, and was talking about how close her family was. And I thought it was really touching. She talked about the unexpected death of her husband a few years ago, and I remember when that made the news and everything. But she said that she was sitting at his gravesite one day, and she felt some presence around her, and her brother and sister came and sat right next to her. Their parents were behind her, and just how strong her family is. And she just really feels that a lot of their strength comes from having all the things that her ancestors had gone through, and all the things her family had gone through, that they just were always building each other up. And so her family was really strong. And she said that her grandmother used to tell her that your siblings were more important than your friends. And if you can't treat your siblings well, you should never treat your friends better than you treat your siblings. And I thought that's a really cool thing to teach the kids.
It is. She has such a strong sense of family, and really, because of watching Who Do You Think You Are and Finding Your Roots, it was actually kind of rare, because it's almost like a lot of these celebrities have such broken homes, or they didn't know who their father was or their mother was.
Very
they were
true.
adopted.
That's a good point.
And she's one of the few that had a really seemingly a strong family base, and she had a strong sense of family. So that was really good to see. And she is just as much Jewish as Marisa Tomei was Italian.
Exactly. And Kal Penn was Indian. They were just, yes, exactly. they first started out talking about her, I don't know if it was maternal or they just said your grandmother. And so either I missed whether they said paternal or I think they just said the grandmother. So, so they started with one grandmother and they were able to find the passenger list where she came over in 1889 as a small child. And I thought that was really great that they had that. And her grandmother's mother, so her great grandmother, had kept a journal of the journey. And, she was just talking about how, her kids got on there clean and got off filthy. It was so bad with, there was a lack of food and all of this, and, their struggle even getting here. So how wonderful that she wrote a journal. I wish some of my ancestors had written a journal.
Me
letters.
too. Me too.
I have no journals. I have no journals.
No, me either.
Yeah. And then they talked about this particular Sandberg family. They had lived in the Pale of Settlement, which is in Russia, which is where they would take all the Jewish people. And they said the majority, if her family hadn't left and immigrated when they did, they would have all died in the Holocaust, because the majority of people that were there died. Now we've seen some other celebrities on the different shows whose families came out of there too. And so, but it was a rarity. It wasn't, not a lot of people came out of there. They just, they were rounded up and taken to the concentration camps, and most of them were killed. So, she was talking about how they're being so brave to leave everything they knew and to come to America to start a new life is why she's here. Because if they hadn't, if they'd stayed, they most likely would not have made it through. And just go ahead.
There was a real sense of course, a lot of these immigrants, the real sense of urgency in whatever situations that they were in. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have immigrants that came over because of religious persecution. My maiden name, my father's family came from France. From the 1600s. And I have a German family. On my dad's side, of the family. They came. I call them a latecomer. It came back in the 1850s. It's not really, I guess, late, but to me, for the rest of my family, they're late.
Yeah.
And so they came over because they were religiously persecuted, and so whatever, there was seemingly persecution with the immigrants mainly that came, or trying to find that better life, and the urge in them to do that was so much more than what that they knew what they were going to have to face to get here.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
A boat ride was 3 months to get here.
Yes.
And it's not fun. It's not like a Carnival cruise
No.
at all.
Yeah, exactly.
And so to take your children on that type of a journey, you were determined. And and I know Sheryl Sandberg, I've kind of actually followed her career a little bit, and she is a tough cookie. And and I think she inherited that from her immigrant ancestors, because you have to be tough cookies to leave your homeland.
He had mentioned to her, Dr. Gates had mentioned to her, he says, how do you think they did it? How do you get through? How did you get through with the struggles you've had? And she says, we build each other as a community. That's what we do. We all do. We build each other. Not everybody is up all the time, and not everybody is down all the time. So when one person starts to give up hope, she said the other person has hope the next day and can pull the person who's losing hope up. And I thought that was a beautiful way to say, it's so true. That's what we do.
Can't you see on the immigrant boat coming over, one day, like you're talking about, there are people that are down, but the ones that are up, they're helping them to stay up so they can make the journey, and then they would probably go back and forth. But you're right, life is that way. But I'm always amazed when I hear immigrant stories and how they got here, why they left. And once they got here, how many stories have we heard of people showing up with $10 in their pocket?
Yeah.
And nothing else. And they made it. And it wasn't easy. But they did. Yep. And us, those of us that are here, that immigrant ancestors, which is a lot of us, And you can look back and say, my immigrants went through all of this. You don't know if they, thought ahead way into the future, that my descendants are going to appreciate this, but they just had, they were strong people.
They were strong people. They were very strong people. I was really amazed that they were able to find the tax. They found from the where they were living, they found a tax from 1846. And you would think that, with all the people being rounded up and taken out, and there wouldn't be any real records left. But they actually were able to find her ancestors in this tax record. And what it was a tax on candles. They had to pay tax on candles. And we're not talking, everyday candles. They're talking about the candles that they use for the worship services.
Mm-hmm.
So it was strictly a tax on the Jewish people. It was,
oh, yes.
It was a tax on them. I just thought, that is just amazing that they were even able to find that record. That's just amazing to me. And that type of what was going on at the time, in that type of atmosphere, that they were able to find that record. And I guess it just goes to show that no matter what's going on, wherever your ancestors lived, maybe something survived. Maybe
yes.
something survived that. And another thing shows her too is, okay, so we've got this tax record. They were paying their taxes on the candles that they were using for their Sabbath day. So that tells her right there that her family were actively living their religion. It didn't matter to them what went on. They were actively living their religion, tax or no tax.
That's
all
right.
These records tell us something. All of it can tell us a story. And then they went on to her other grandmother, who was Rosalind Nuss. And she had an interesting story. She was selling things out of her trunk. Breast cancer. I thought that was really interesting. She was I'm trying to remember, watches. She was selling watches. She goes, those fake watches that half the time they didn't work, and she said she'd take a little screwdriver.
Yes.
But how wonderful is that, to know that your grandmother was doing? And that just reminded me, her parents were arrested by the KGB. Did you remember that? They were arrested by the KGB. So she's got all these cool people in her ancestry. She's the way she is. But one of the stories that she wanted to know about was her grandmother's parents. He was Israel. His name was Israel, and her name was Rosalind. And she said the family story was that they committed suicide, and she wanted to know if that was the case. And so what they found was it wasn't the case. So sometimes those family stories, no matter how much we want to believe them, they're not true. This one didn't even really have a little bit of fact to it.
And it left me with the question was, okay, you found out that the story was not true. But my question is, why did the family say that? I can understand it was passed down and you wouldn't know any different. But why did it even start to begin with? What facilitated them just saying that? They really didn't dig up an answer for that.
They really didn't. The only thing I could think of was Israel's father drank himself to death, and maybe that kind of became, I can't even say the word. I told you I can't talk tonight. He died of liver disease. Cirrhosis of the liver. I can't say it. Anyway, maybe that's how that story, maybe they just said, he killed himself. He drank himself to death, and that became suicide. I mean, you know how things change.
Yes.
So,
well, when you think about it, if he drank himself to the point of that it killed him because of cirrhosis of the liver, many people in a way could say he killed himself because he put it in his body. Exactly. But then as the generations went along, it came to mean he killed himself.
And then that turned into suicide. That old telephone game that we've talked about before.
Exactly.
It just changed. So that's just a theory. We don't know. It didn't explain it. And then the saddest thing is 3 months after he dies, their baby dies. They have an infant that dies. And then right after that, the mom sends all of her kids, except for Israel, because he's old enough, he's 15, to an orphanage.
Yep.
So it sounds like to me she must have had some kind of emotional breakdown, or maybe she felt like, I can't raise these kids. My husband is gone. Israel may be 15, but he can't support the family. And so it might have been she either had a breakdown and felt like she couldn't take care of him, or financially she had no choice. And so, we don't know if somebody came and took them from her, or what, or if she No, I think it said she voluntarily placed them there.
She did.
They did have some records from the orphanage, which I thought was fabulous that they were able to dig that up, because those are records sometimes we don't think to look at, and I wonder, where was the clue? I'd love to know what record was the clue that sent them to the orphanage. How did they know? Because when you do a search somewhere with those names, did orphanage records pop up? You know what I mean? How did the clue go to the orphanage? I'd like to know that. I would really like to know that.
These shows always leave me with more questions than answers. But always. And all these things happen in all of our families. And so, you don't need to pass judgment on our ancestors at all about anything they've done or whatever, because, they're in the moment, and they're doing, most of the time, they're doing what they think is the best at that moment. But when we see it through generations later, through our eyes, we think, well, why not this, or why this, or, I have an ancestor who his wife passed away, and he had older children who were married, but he had younger minor children, and he farmed out all of his minor children to other families. And I think to myself, why did he lived another 20 years? I thought, why didn't he take care of his own children? Why didn't the older children take care? I don't have answers to that. All I know is that he probably just did the best he could do.
The best he could do. The times were so different. Communities were different. Everything, social, economic reasons probably were more, what caused them to make these decisions. We don't know anything about what was going on at that time, and we can't, like you said, we can't put it into our day. Things are so different for us, so different, and we just can't do it. But she was able to slowly get them back one by one. She was able to get them back. So she must have had to maybe prove that she could take care of them, or maybe she would just go get them one at a time as she maybe made more money, or things got a bit more settled, or maybe as she felt better. I mean, because we don't know the real reason why she put them in there. But then here comes another blow. She dies a year after getting the last one. And so it's just, what a sad story. And she died of heart disease, so how they did that to be that she killed herself, I don't know.
No,
but
I think, and it could be that the father, cirrhosis of the liver, you could kind of constitute as killing themselves, and then but over time, like you talked about, it just became they both killed themselves.
Yeah, got to be. Yeah.
So that's why it's always important to research those family stories, no matter how ingrained they are.
Yes.
And believe me, your family members that are not genealogists are going to say, well, that is the story. I don't care what you find, that's the story. Because I had an uncle one time tell me, when I showed him proof of something, he was like, I don't care what you found, this is the story.
This is the story, because that's what they've always been told. Yeah. So I found it interesting that Israel ends up, after his mother's death, taking in his siblings. But there's an interesting story about that census. Do you remember that, what happened, how he was listed? He was listed as the head of household. His sister, I believe, said sister, but the brothers were listed as his children. Same names. It was obvious if you're doing the research that these were not his children.
Right.
Which goes to show, once again, records aren't always correct, and they can, especially census records. Census records you've got to be careful with those census records. They're notorious for, the wrong relationships, or, birthdays, or whatever, any of that information. They're notorious. All you may really probably count on is for that day, that person living in that area, and they were at that house. They may have never lived there. They may have, been visiting. But the point is, on that very day, when the census worker came, they were there. Maybe. Sometimes
yeah.
I think, yeah, I think Johnny lives there too. And oh, I think there's a Susan and an Ann. So you
Right.
never know. Maybe you can't even count on that. But I thought that was a great example of how census records can be wrong. And
Mhm.
I'm wondering how many people that may have thrown off, people that are researching that family.
Oh, yeah. I'm
And they've
sure.
gotten all
Yeah.
confused.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've gotten all confused about that. And so Dr. Gates set them straight. So they're probably going, oh, that was the problem.
That's right. That's right.
Well, we better move on to Kal Penn because we could talk all night.
Oh, yes.
And nobody wants to listen to that. So anyway, I thought it was interesting that his parents came over in 1960. And so
Yes.
they were, these were latecomers, really latecomers. I mean,
Really.
but
So
as far
first
as
generation.
yeah, he's first generation in American. And his parents came over from India, and for the same kind of things. They wanted to come over and search for that better life. And he was talking about. Go ahead.
I was just about to say that his was interesting to me because one of the things that we've always talked about with these shows is some of the lack of showing records and lack of where you got the information and lack of how many hours they spent. But he came from India, and India is actually notoriously known for not taking care of their records. And so the archives and things, they talked about it actually in this episode, which I was so glad to hear about the condition. They touched on the condition of the records and the archives there, but they were actually able to talk to, and I don't know that they even said which family member, maybe his parents, like you said, maybe his parents, but they had oral histories. And this actually reminds me a little bit, sort of kind of, about the Chinese ancestry. They are really rooted in oral history, and it's like it's like required to pass it down to
Native
generation to generation.
American too, right?
Native American,
Right.
exactly. And so thank goodness for these oral histories. Now they may not be 100% correct, but there's something when you don't have records to find in an archive,
Right.
And so
I was going to say
I really
African Americans. Yeah, a lot of African Americans base a lot of their family history on oral history too, because it wasn't written down. So for a lot of them, that's some clues for them as they go back to like other ethnic groups. Those oral histories are really important. There are some oral histories that end up getting written down, and there are some oral histories that people will record on tapes, and I think that's really cool. Or whatever it was at that time period. I know the WPA did a bunch of oral histories, and they recorded them on the old-fashioned tape recorder. Today we can get our little digital stuff out and whatever we use and record. But if you're lucky enough to search in a archive and see if they've got anything that you can listen to, those are really cool, because I know a lot of archives and a lot of library special collections have oral histories. So that's a great place to look if you're looking for information on your family. Look at me talking about archives, and it should be you.
No, hey, but you are a fantastic researcher, and you go to these archives when you do work for clients. And you're correct about the oral histories, because I know, and just in my small archive, we have some oral histories for World War II veterans. The local historical society tried to capture this because, that was the next generation that was going to be passing away. And we also have several oral histories of just local residents talking about their lives living in this area. And so it may not be your ancestor giving the history, but they could be talking about schools, churches, and places in the area where your ancestors lived, that you can get that information off of someone else's oral histories. And a lot of times they are recorded. Sometimes they're transcribed. They're a question, like a Q&A type transcription. And so they're just fantastic because and when you're listening to the ones that are recorded, you hear the personalities of the people, and it's just wonderful. And so I would highly encourage genealogists to seek out oral histories and just see what you might
oral histories. I'm sorry, Melissa.
That's
Those
okay.
oral histories may not be where you think they're going to be just because you were from a certain area. Just like Melissa, they've got this program where they're doing that. And when you first said you were doing it, I said, hey, my grandfather was here. Do you know if anybody was talking about, you know, do you
Yeah.
have a tag that says, you know, these areas? And so you never know where you might find that information, because there could be an oral history of some of the battles that my grandfather fought in that somebody has recorded somewhere, and that would be wonderful. Even if they never mentioned his name, I would still get a sense
Right.
of what he went through. So those are
Exactly.
so important. I'm so glad that you brought those up. Um, he loved his grandfather, and his grandfather had a picture of Gandhi on his,
Yes.
yes, in his little office, in his, you know, and so he was talking about the fact that his grandfather had that picture of Gandhi because he actually knew Gandhi and actually was part of some of the rebellion that was going on and the things that Gandhi was trying to change. And one of those things was they wanted to make their own material. They didn't want to import the British material anymore. They wanted, it was the white, and I can't remember what it's called. Do you remember what that is called? I know I read,
No.
oh gosh, I can't remember what it's called. Oh, Cotty. That's what it was called. I knew I wrote it down. I found it. And it was white. And when you see pictures of Gandhi, you see him in the white. And
Mm-hmm.
so the Indian people were making their own fabrics, and it was the white khadi, and that's what they were wearing. And that was actually the starting of a rebellion against the British. They wanted to have their own industries and make their own things and not be subjected to the British. And so he said that his grandfather, even when he immigrated to America, always wore the white clothing. He said even when it got cold, he'd put a sweater or something over it, but he always had that white clothing on. And I thought that was so wonderful. That, I mean, he really, you know, was strong in his beliefs. And another thing, we were talking about reading up on history, and they read a bit of history. His grandfather had always told him about a time where he was beaten by the British,
Mm-hmm.
and that he had some scars and things like that. And he told him the story about being beaten by them. So they found a newspaper report about a time when his grandfather was in a certain location, and Gandhi was there, and they were talking about the people being beaten. And so, of course, it doesn't name his grandfather, but you kind of put two and two together. Grandpa says he was beaten, he was living there, Gandhi's there, the police, I mean, the British are there. That's probably when it happened.
Right.
And so to get that and to read about it and know that most likely, if not that specific incident, something in that time period is what happened to him, I think that was really cool to show him that. And you could see that he was like, yeah, he said that he was beaten by the British and he had scars and bruises, and yeah, so you could see that that was really important that they got that story. And now he's got, since his grandfather has passed away, he's got that picture of Gandhi. And for people that don't know, he worked in the Obama administration. Kal Penn did, and he said he
Yes.
took it and he hung it in his office there. How cool is that? Oh, that was
Oh,
really,
that
really
is
cool.
very cool. I think about too, and I think about us living today and the lives that we have experienced. And I thought about Kal Penn talking about being the Obama administration, and think about his descendants. 2-3 generations from now, when one of his descendants is on, finding your roots, number 585, and and they bring up this picture of Kal Penn, being in the Obama administration and stuff. We live our lives too every day. As I encourage genealogists to document your own life. And I got,
So
and with Kal Penn's life, you kind of got a sense of his life. The other two, not so much. The Marisa Tomei and Sheryl Sandberg, they didn't quite cover that, other than the being celebrities. But with him, they talked a little bit more about what he actually has done in his life. And so, I actually keep a journal because none of my ancestors did, and I wish they had. And so I do, but our lives, we have a story to tell too. Just like the stories we're trying to dig up on all of our ancestors, we have a story to tell too. And I try to tell genealogists, you don't want your children and your grandchildren to tell your story.
That's so very true. That is
You want to
so
tell your
very true.
Yes, so you want to tell your own story. So you need to keep a journal or write up your life story. My mother-in-law wrote up her life story for me. She told me I don't want it published, I don't want it seen, but here you go, kind of thing. And so if we don't do it, it'll be gone, and then your grandchildren get to tell what grandma was like.
Yeah, you got a really good point there. And with technology today, there's so many ways that we can do it. We can
Yes, there
write it,
is.
or we can use our devices and record it. We can
Mhm.
do a picture, put some pictures together and tell a story that way. We've got so many ways that we can document our lives. I think that's great that you write a journal. I it comes and goes. It just depends on what's going on in my life. Um, yeah, so I need to be a little bit more consistent so that there's not these big, like 2 or 3 year gaps in between. And then I got to try to catch up, and then that doesn't work. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, but Kal Penn's, I liked his story. I don't know
Mhm.
why. I don't have any Indian in my family whatsoever, but for some reason I gravitate towards the Indian heritage. I just think it's fascinating and what they've been through,
Mhm.
and so,
Mhm.
but to
Yeah.
see Kal Penn being a first generation
Yeah.
from his parents immigrating here, and
Yeah.
so it's just cool to say that.
Yeah, I think so too. And I was just remembering that, you brought up the oral history. They said they went back 9 generations
Hmm.
on that oral history. I mean, that's some oral history. That's
Yes.
amazing. That's amazing. Something that somebody would have to memorize and add another generation as somebody else is born. That's amazing that they're able to do that. I think that's really cool. I would love to just sit and listen to somebody recite
Oh
a,
yeah.
a 9 generation oral
Hmm.
history. That would be really cool, just to sit in front of them. And I think we've seen some other episodes. I want to say that I think there may have been a Who Do You Think You Are where they were in Ireland where they had somebody do that. So she does
Yes,
that.
I think
She
you're
does
right.
that. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So, that would just give me chills to know that was kept in somebody's memory. I think that is just wonderful. Well, is there anything else you want to bring up about the 3 immigrants from this episode that we got to learn about?
No, I think we covered it all. I always love when they do. It's kind of like they do themed shows, and
Mhm.
their immigrant one is always one of my favorites. And because I've only been able to, as I say, cross the pond once with one of my surnames, and so I'm still working on a lot of the others. I kind of know where, but it's like you kind of have to. It gets a little harder. You kind of have to know, specifically kind of where before you can actually make
Exactly.
that jump. And so I've always encouraged, and all genealogists should be encouraged that wherever you are in your research, that, not to give up and to keep going because, I've been doing this now 29 years and, I still have, challenges that I'm trying to overcome with my research. And I know as more records become
Mhm.
available, when I say available, I mean, and here comes the archivist in me, there
Yeah,
are records sitting on shelves in archives that have not been microfilmed, they're not online,
exactly.
but they're being processed. And, pay attention to these archives that are in the area where your ancestors lived.
Mhm.
Contact them periodically and say, hey, what have you got new that's been donated? Or, hey, what have you processed that's new that's available for researchers? You just may
Mhm.
be surprised because they're working on them every day. So they have to make them available.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I love that. I love the thought that, they haven't found everything yet.
No, no, they
People are
haven't.
still, people are still doing things like, tearing down an old house and finding things on the wall. So you just never, maybe that one
Yes.
document is in the wall somewhere and somebody will be, redoing a house somewhere and there will come and they'll hopefully donate it and not throw it away.
Here's a last story for you for encouragement. About a couple 2 3 months ago, I had a gentleman walk into my archives and he handed me a box. And he said, he said, this was stored in an old storage building. And someone told me I needed to bring it to you. I said, okay. When I looked at the box, it looked like like a 1950s shirt box. And I thought, oh, okay. So I kind of set it aside, didn't place any importance on it for a couple of days. When I finally opened the box, I got to look in there and the documents were all original documents. And the oldest document in there was dated 1814. The earliest document was dated
Oh.
1868, and it actually belonged to a family, the James Scarborough family. And I actually consulted with an archivist next door to me in the next county over, because actually these were before my county was ever formed. So it came out of that county. And he came over and he looked at these records with me. There's like 60 documents or more. And he kept looking at these records and he kept saying, I've never seen these. These are not in our records in the county. These, and that's what he kept saying. And I'm thinking, oh, and they were just sitting in an old 1950s shirt box stored in a storage building. And now they're going to come to light and help some researcher.
Oh, exactly.
So it can happen with your family records too.
That's
They
right.
can just show up.
Yeah, somebody's family is going to be greatly blessed for that. Well,
Yes.
on that note, we have been talking for quite a while, so
I'm sorry.
No, it's wonderful talking to you. We literally could sit here all night and just talk. So it was so much fun to have you on tonight, Melissa. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I enjoy it every time.
Thank you so much. And on that note, we will see you next time for Gem Friends. Bye, everybody.